Hi there, it's Polly here with Mr. Snoots. Yes, so we're just doing some tea talks, and to prove it, I have tea. Ta-da! Pong tea, lemon, Indonesian brand. Indonesian teas are much overlooked. They're excellent. Viewer request, viewer prompting. It was about modern design aesthetic and essentially the shift in games from having individual systems designed almost at whim to cover individual situations and the more modern idea of having a unified system that covers everything. All right, so this is in role-playing games. So I guess first off, why would it be desirable? Well, now a real criminal in this regard is Dungeons and Dragons. Say, let's look at advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Within it, it has many different kind of subsystems. So advanced Dungeons and Dragons has no system in it for testing characteristics. So can I dodge the thing? Can I figure the thing out? Can I remember the thing? There wasn't really an official test for it. There was a general understanding that maybe you could roll a d20 and try and get less than the characteristic. Maybe. Wasn't really official. But if you wanted to turn undead as a cleric, this was rolled on a 2d6 chart. However, if you were a thief and you wanted to pick locks or move silently or climb, that shifts to a completely different percentile system. There was a 2d6 system for a reaction chart for essentially how friendly or hostile people that you met were. And on we went. And combat, of course, is a d20 roll high system. So, yeah, many different systems kind of kludged in as necessary. And, of course, and then, of course, you've got the saving throw systems, where saving throws are, again, d20 roll high. They're specific to oddly specific things. There was a different saving throw versus wands than versus magic. Don't know why. Can't quite get the thing behind that one. Okay, so this was a mess. It's a mess because it gives you just many different factors that you're going to have to keep track of as you create a character. You're going to have to keep track of what bonuses, different characteristics, and so on give you in what sections of the different systems that are being used to make the game run. So I can't just say my charisma gives me a +1 on dice rolls, because it might be used for my reaction chart roll, but then again that can be sometimes different to the number of loyal retainers I've got. But what happens if I'm testing my charisma? There also wasn't really a skill system in D&D. It was, face it, D&D was the beta test game. It was early and it was clunky and somehow limped forward and survived. All right. Well, drinks. But oddly enough, very early on, there were attempts to make simplified systems that could be easily taught and easily understood. Right from the very get-out, there was Tunnels and Trolls. Now, Tunnels and Trolls has a core mechanic, which is a saving throw, which is a dice roll to which you add characteristics, and you're trying to beat a target number. And the higher the target number, the higher the difficulty. And this is used for everything. This is used for combat. This is used for achieving skill tasks. This is used for ducking and dodging danger. So if a mind control spell attempts to control your mind, obviously you'll face it off with willpower. If a trap is sprung and a whole bunch of, darts come whizzing down the passageway towards you, you will try and make a saving throw versus dexterity. It had a strange melee combat system, which it did use a different system where you rolled a bucket load of dice. But the bucket load of dice, it still did use sort of an adds system. So, but missile fire and so on used the saving throw system. I mean, rolling against the target difficulty. So, so it's got two blended systems and was trying to be as clean cut as it possibly could. And Tunnels and Trolls, it's a flawed system. The combat system, unfortunately, it snowballs. Once you start losing, you are going to lose. Because it's a situation where two sides both roll dice. Whoever gets the lowest score subtracts that from the higher side score, and the remainder is the dice damage, or is the damage that goes on to the loser. But the amount of dice that you were rolling, in many cases, is being lessened the more hit points you lose. So if you've got 8 dice versus 6 dice, let's face it, the 6 is statistically going to start losing. But as it starts losing, it's not going to be rolling 6 dice anymore. Once it takes damage, it's going to start rolling 4 dice, and then 3 and 2. And you can see where that went. They have fixed this in later editions, but that's where we were. But Tunnels and Trolls, for that, all that flaw, it did have that very simple unified system, and that actually explained its popularity. When you listened to people who were playing it as opposed to D&D, they said, well, it's pretty simple to use, and it gives me a good game. It's pretty spectacular, and but it's really kind of simple and fun, was what they kept saying. Yeah, there wasn't so much extraneous little raw material to use, and anything was always expressed in those saving throw terms. So the lads from Chaosium, their RuneQuest system, RuneQuest 1, was brilliant. Everything was a D100 system, rolling low, and on this it was taking from classic skirmish war games such as Donald Featherstone's skirmish war games, which used this fantastic idea where you have a skill which is expressed as a percentage between 1 and 100 of you, how completely you know a skill, and then you have to roll that number or less on these percentile dice, which generate a number between 1 and 100, and if it falls within the 0 and your skill band, then you have succeeded. Fantastic idea. But this could be used for combat, hit and parry, firing weapons, using skills. But what RuneQuest brought in was this idea of we can also use it for things like skill tests. So since we've got a 3d6 base characteristic system, what I could do is multiply any given characteristic by 5 and take that as a percentage. If I just have to roll against strength, if I have 9 strength, that's going to be 45 or less on percentile dice to do something that just requires raw strength. Or I've got my skills, which are always expressed as a percentile value, roll that or less, and damage is using other dice. Individual weapons will do individual things. So again, it was a very simple system, and I think RuneQuest's popularity again came from the fact that here's this unified system. It felt cleaner. It didn't feel kludged. It felt like you were actually getting some clever design in here, but it also meant you could explain to someone how to play the game almost instantly. It wasn't burdened down with rules and exceptions. Very, very easy to learn, very easy to teach, and therefore very easy to make your own game. You could quite easily create your own variations and worlds, which Chaosium then went on and did. Call of Cthulhu, Stormbringer, and a host of other games, Ringworld, God bless it, all using the same core system, which now is BRP, basic role-playing. so robust that this has continued since the 70s, almost unchanged, because it's a rip roar of a core system. Really works. Now, Traveller, of course, is the other early contender. Traveller came out quite early, and it too is an interesting, robust bit of game design. It's 2d6. Now, 2d6, of course, the bell curve in a 2-dice roll means that the dice scores tend to group around that 6, 7, 8 area. And, of course, rolls of 2s and 12s are, of course, really very rare. So, for the mathematically inclined, it's sort of an interesting system, because as you need higher rolls, your chance is becoming many magnitudes less likely of happening, a non-linear system, which is how they wanted it. But it was always came down to roll 2d6, looking for an 8 or higher. A skill is a number that will add to your dice. So if I roll a 4 and a 1, good, that's 5. But if I've got a skill of 3, I add 3 to that, becomes an 8. Ta-da, success. Now, it ran entirely off 6-sided dice. For one thing, that was kind of cheaper to do, but the other thing was that its damage system, of course, didn't need you to have lots of different wacky d4s, d8s, d10s, or whatever. It tended to all be a number of dice that were inflicted. Could be a dice plus an add, could be a d6 plus 3, or 2d6, 3d6 for rifles. And a hit, you had to then roll to see if you went through their armor. If you did, you inflicted a number of dice damage which were whittled off your opponent's characteristics, whittling them down. Your strength, dexterity, and endurance. And when all 3 of these reach 0, you are dead. So, again, bit of a sort of smack in the teeth for D&D, wasn't it? He thinks so. Because, again, it's one system. It didn't have that cludged feel where it's like, oh, I need a thing for psionics. Oh, I'll just smack a whole new psionics thing on there, and this is going to have its own charts, its own tables, its own whatever. So you can see D&D's kind of popularity starting to be whittled away as systems with a cleaner design ethos start coming in, end of the 70s. Now, another one that actually did a really good job, Steve Jackson's The Fantasy Trip. So it's 1980. So, all right, so we've had RuneQuest and Traveller have been going strong for 4 or 5 years by that stage. But Jackson did a good job. I don't like him, but he did a good job. That's a 3d6 roll low system. So again, it's a bell curve. It's got a broader range than the 2d6. And so you've got, so for his, the Fantasy Trip in the Labyrinth, which were 2 pocket skirmish games, essentially. One called Wizards and one called Melee, which he blended together into a role-playing game. And for this, you design characters. Say a typical person, you've got, 3 characteristics. And at 8, but you've got 8 points to split up between them as a starting character. And you have to roll the value or less on 3d6. And again, it tends to be a d6 sort of oriented system. Because it came from a pocket game that presumed you probably only had a d6 in hand. But a similar thing, rolling to hit is done using that 3d6 thing. Saving throws against things, dodging gas, dodging bullets, dodging monsters. So, those would be essentially, sort of to my mind, the core systems that were doing elegantly streamlined and incredibly robust games systems that could be turned to virtually anything. And you can see that because Jackson's The Fantasy Trip rolled over to become GURPS, which is a generic universal role-playing system. Because the systems were so universal, they could be used for anything, and were. Likewise, Chaosium's D100 system became basic role-playing, something you can use for anything. And the Traveller system, that 2d6 system, is going strong today. You'll find that being used in things like the Cepheus game engine, which is the Traveller game engine, but it's used not just for science fiction, its original intent, but there are sword and sorcery variants and horror variants, kids on bike variants, because it's a good, simple, easy system. Aha. So D&D eventually caught up with the times. This is what drove the design teams for 3rd edition, where they decided, let us boil everything down to a D20 system, roll high, and all of the characteristics will give you bonuses or subtractions to a D20 roll, which is trying to roll past a difficulty level, be that an armor class or a difficulty level of a saving throw. Unfortunately, because it is on a D20, it is entirely random. It's a linear system. So, but then again, so is the D100. But I think there's not a lot of kind of room for nuance in straight D20, but it's simple to teach, and it's simple to remember, and it allows you to do characters where you don't have to flip through many different charts and tables and so on to figure out pluses and bonuses. It streamlines character design. So, that is kind of the genesis of better game design. Essentially, Dungeons and Dragons was, like I said, it's the beta version game. It's the first one out there. They're kludging stuff together as it comes up in play. You can see, they're just coming up with an idea what works. Oh, I'll do a 2d6 chart. That's easy. Oh, I'll do a percentile chart because I've seen that used in another game, and that gives you lots of possibilities. So it would just be thrown in. Kind of nail that on the side of the bus. There we go. Right. It's part of the vehicle now. So, yeah, it's where they didn't step back and say, what's our core mechanic? Because they didn't have a core mechanic. Because you've got to remember, original D&D came from chainmail. And it's kind of like almost a set of rules addenda nailed on the outside of another set of rules. And even within that, they're also pointing you to go and use Avalon Hill's Outdoor Survival as their outdoor exploration game. So yeah, it was a kludge because it was people pulling things out from different areas to just kind of make a gaming experience, as opposed to other people who've sat down and come up with a system. Now, another wacky thing that we did see, of course, were the massively over-complex simulationist systems. And they always kind of amuse me because what happens is, and slightly guilty of this myself, where someone would just come up with a combat system. A cool combat system. Yahoo! I've got an amazing way of killing people. And this is going to be the core of my game. Oh, and then I've got to do, I guess, something for when people do something other than killing people. So you would get everything from various role masters, space opera, whatever, where a massive amount of attention is paid into things like combat rules and wounding and armor penetration or whatever, but the actual, if there's a skill system there, it's almost an afterthought. I don't know, just roll percentile. So yeah, that kind of massive overfocus on combat did get in the way of coming up with unified systems, because one tiny facet of the game is really overworked and done in a massive detail, where everything else is just sort of broadly tarred with a great big brush. So, and I recently did a review of Space Opera, God help us. And yeah, that's a very typical game of that era, where there's just this massive amount of attention spent on combat. And like someone said, the space combat rules, you're rolling to bracket a target before you roll to see if you can actually hit the target, but you have to detect the target first. But he can counteract your attempts to find him, but you can counter jam his counter. So, oh my God, ECM, ECCM, ECCCM. Or what are we doing for a skill test on something? Oh, don't know. Roll percentile dice and look it up on this chart. Oh, I think the modern design philosophy of KISS, basically keep it simple, stupid, is important when you're designing games. I think if you have to keep coming up with subsystems, you got it wrong. I really do think you should have a system that can handle everything. And if there's a little bit more attention spent, on combat or something, well, I guess you're kind of telling us where you want the game to go, but I can see that this is life and death for characters, so you want a little bit more nuance. I'm not going to dump on a system just because it spends more time on combat. I'd prefer it not to. But what's really impressed me lately is seeing some games where, so you've always had games like good old RuneQuest and so on, where if you make a roll and succeed, you succeed. But if you make a roll within a lower band, this is a critical success. And in combat, they will detail exactly what this does. You can ignore armor, you do more damage, you can choose a hit location, or whatever happens in the system. So this is detailed. But for normal skill use, they just say, oh, and you just get an extra special flourishy use of the skill. And that's okay, but it's not good, because the system is, I feel a bit left down by the system, because in combat this gets me something, in not combat, meh. However, in some recent games, and some of these particularly coming out from like Europe that I've seen, they've actually made sure that critical success actually gives you something when it's being used in non-combat skills. It's a meaningful thing whenever it turns up. So in some cases, this might be, it'll give you some kind of leverage into more of the story. So it might say, for instance, there might be a listing inside every single skill, and it tells you what the criticals are. And okay, a little bit to refer there, but it's not a bad idea, because if I've got an investigation skill and roll a critical, it might say, all right, if you succeeded this skill, whatever thing you were trying to investigate, you get an answer. If you get a critical, for each level of critical or whatever, you get an answer to one extra question that you can sort of ask the umpire or something. Yeah, so the next phase of this is not just a system that works for everything, but a system that really works for everything and doesn't give you great detail in combat and then just a hand wave to everything else. Something where the system handles things evenly within the entire spectrum of things that we use in storytelling, rather than just in the violence. But anyway, yeah, so it's like, I think minds were moving very early to say a good game should have a system that we can then apply to everything. It's just that, D&D is what it is and was what it was. A bunch of guys who kind of nailed a bunch of cool ideas together and were surprised to see that the thing flew. But it took them, 25 years before they sat down and said, you know what, what if we rationalize all this and integrate it into one system, which became the D20 system, which works, which is enjoyed, which is now used in many, both retro clones and variants. Some that have really impressed me, by the way, are things like the Siege engine that Castles and Crusades uses. That's a very kind of neat version of it. I actually rather like the thing for 5th edition D&D, the roll with advantage, where you just roll twice and take the best, or roll twice and take the worst if it's disadvantaged. Now, that is really quite clear and simple, because many games before it was always counting up factors. I'm going to fire at him. Oh, +2 if he's at medium range, +4 if he's at long range. Is he slightly obscured? You'd have to count up all these different numerical factors to get a difficulty number. But that's just sort of like a more blanket thing, where you can just say it's either hard to do this or it's easy to do this. That's an interesting bit of shorthanding. I mean, it's not nuanced, but it is an interesting piece of work, along that scale of trying to do something that's easy to teach and easy to play. Something that'll give you a game and get you in there playing without having to worry about someone learning all the chapter and verse of a dense book of rules. So anyway, some very clever people have worked for a very long time to bring us a lot of games so we can have fun. And God bless all of them. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. And keep playing. Hope to see you all around the games table sometime. Meanwhile, Indonesian tea. Cheers.